What was supposed to be a simple routine checkup turned into horror when a pregnant woman was brutally attacked by her own husband in front of cameras. The video leaked, the United Kingdom stood still, and the case they tried to cover up exploded as a symbol of resistance. Wounded, discredited, and threatened, she decided to fight, not just for herself, but for the life she carried. If you like stories like this, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and leave your comment saying where you're listening from. The sound of Louisa Matthews's footsteps echoed through the polished corridor of St. Vincent's Hospital, the most prestigious in Brighton. The fluorescent light reflected on the white walls as she delicately caressed her 7-month belly. The pregnancy had brought a peace she had never imagined possible, despite the circumstances surrounding her. At 32, Louisa had become one of the most respected architects in the county capital. Her talent for sustainable projects had caught the attention of major construction companies and eventually of Richard Allister, heir to the Allister construction empire, one of the largest firms in the southeast. The romance was quick and intense. In less than 6 months, they were married in a lavish ceremony that filled the social pages across the entire county. In the eyes of Brighton society, they formed the perfect couple, he with his real estate empire, she with her innovative vision. What no one saw were the small cracks that began to appear shortly after the honeymoon. Sitting in the waiting room for another routine checkup, Louisa took a deep breath. Dr. Paul Miller, her obstetrician, was late, which was unusual for someone so methodical. Patients came and went, but she remained there, pensive. "Would you like a glass of water?" asked Mrs. Irene, the middle-aged attendant who always greeted her with a warm smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Irene, I'm fine." The truth was, Louisa wasn't fine. In recent weeks, Richard had been demonstrating increasingly controlling behavior. He questioned her outings, her projects, even her conversations with friends. The architect had tried to attribute this change to anxiety about their daughter's arrival, but deep down, she knew there was something more. That's when the phone rang. Richard's name flashed on the screen. "Where are you?" His voice sounded cold, calculated. "At the hospital, waiting for Dr. Paul." "You knew I had..." "An appointment today, Richard. I knew you had an appointment, but I didn't know you needed to dress as if you were going to a fashion show." Louisa looked at her simple navy blue dress, a piece that barely disguised her prominent belly. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb. Robert told me he saw you leaving all dressed up. Who are you getting dressed up for? For the doctor?" Robert was the driver assigned by Richard to follow Louisa's every move since she had insisted on continuing to drive even while pregnant. The businessmen had argued it was for safety, but she knew it was just another form of control. "Richard, this is ridiculous. I'm wearing a common maternity dress and..." "I'm on my way," he interrupted, then hung up. Louisa felt a tightening in her chest. In their recent arguments, Richard always found a way to make her seem guilty, to twist her most innocent words and actions. It was a psychological game that left her exhausted and full of doubts. On the other side of the hospital, Dr. Andrew Caldwell was finishing a meeting with his cardiology team. At 40, he had become head of the department, after a brilliant career that included training abroad and numerous published research papers. Known for his professional seriousness, Andrew hid a sensitive heart beneath his impeccably white lab coat. Divorced 3 years prior, he dedicated himself entirely to the hospital and its patients. "Dr. Andrew, I need your signature to release the new equipment," said Teresa Grant, the efficient administrator who kept the hospital running like clockwork. "Of course, Teresa. Leave the documents in my office and I'll sign them today." As he walked down the corridor towards the elevator, Andrew checked his watch. He had exactly 15 minutes until his next appointment. Enough time to grab a coffee in the cafeteria. That's when he heard a growing argument coming from the obstetrics waiting room. The moment Richard Allister entered the hospital, the atmosphere changed. Dressed in an impeccable Italian suit, the businessman exuded power and arrogance. Employees lowered their heads as he passed, some out of respect, others out of fear. The Allister family was not just rich, it was influential. They controlled everything from construction companies to media outlets and had politicians on their payroll. Louisa felt her stomach churn when she saw her husband approaching. The forced smile he offered to employees completely disappeared when he reached her. "Do you think I'm an idiot?" he whispered, sitting beside her. "Richard, please, we're in a hospital. People are watching. Let them watch. After all, you like to be watched, don't you?" His tone of voice was low, but his words were sharp as razors. Louisa looked around, embarrassed. Some people pretended not to notice the tension, but Mrs. Irene watched intently, ready to intervene if necessary. "You're being unfair. I just came for a routine checkup. What do you want me to wear, pajamas?" It was at that moment that something inside Richard seemed to snap. A dangerous glint flickered in his eyes, and he gripped Louisa's wrist tightly. "Are you challenging me? In front of all these people? Have you forgotten who pays your bills? Who took you out of that back alley office where you used to work? Let go of me, you're hurting me." Louisa tried to pull away, but the grip only tightened. "I gave you everything, everything, and how do you thank me? By insinuating yourself with other men while carrying my child. It's a girl, Richard, and please let go." The correction seemed to enrage him even more. With a sudden movement, he pulled her up. "Do you think you can correct me? You're nothing without me, understand? Nothing." At that moment, Mrs. Irene approached. "Mr. Alistair, please, calm down. We're in a hospital." "Stay out of this, you meddling old woman," Richard snarled, pushing the elderly lady aside. The movement caught the attention of other patients and staff. A nurse ran to help Mrs. Irene, while another picked up the phone, probably to call security. That's when Richard did the unthinkable. In a fit of rage, he pushed Louisa against the wall and pressed his forearm against her belly. "Maybe this way you'll learn to respect me. Maybe this way you'll understand that you can't challenge me." Louisa's scream echoed through the corridor, a scream of pain, of fear, but mainly of despair, as she felt the pressure on her daughter. That tearing sound reached Dr. Andrews' ears exactly as he was stepping out of the elevator. In a matter of seconds, the doctor assessed the situation. Without hesitation, he ran towards the couple and, with a strength that surprised everyone, pulled Richard away from Louisa. "What do you think you're doing?" Andrew firmly held the businessman's arms, immobilizing him against the opposite wall. "Let go of me. You don't know who you're dealing with." Richard struggled, his face red with hatred. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. A coward who assaults a pregnant woman." Andrew's voice was controlled but filled with contempt. At that moment, 2 security guards arrived running, followed by Dr. Paul Miller, who immediately went to Louisa. "Call the police," Andrew ordered, handing Richard over to the security guards. "And record everything on the security cameras." Louisa was pale, breathing with difficulty, her hands protectively over her belly. Paul gently guided her to a stretcher. "We're going to examine you right now, Louisa. I need to check if everything is all right with the baby." As she was taken to an examination room, Louisa looked back and saw Andrew watching her with genuine concern. For a brief moment their eyes met, establishing a silent connection amidst the chaos. In the lobby, Richard continued to shout threats. "You don't know who I am. I'll shut down this hospital. I'll ruin all of you." "Mr. Alistair," said Teresa Grant, who had just arrived at the scene, "I suggest you calm down. The cameras recorded everything. The police are on their way." The mention of the cameras seemed to finally hit him. Richard stopped struggling and looked at the ceiling, locating the small device that had captured the entire scene. For a moment, a shadow of concern crossed his face, quickly replaced by an arrogant smile. "This won't amount to anything," he murmured, adjusting his jacket. "You know who I am." In the examination room, Paul moved the transducer over Louisa's belly while she watched the screen anxiously. "The heart is beating normally," the doctor said, pointing to a pulsating spot on the screen. "There doesn't seem to be any detachment or bleeding." Louisa let out a sigh of relief as silent tears streamed down her face. "What happened out there, Louisa?" Paul asked gently. I don't know how things got to this point," she replied between sobs. "He wasn't like this in the beginning." Paul nodded comprehendingly. "I know this isn't the ideal time, but I need to ask, was this the first time he physically assaulted you?" Louisa lowered her eyes. "Physically, yes, but There are other types of aggression, aren't there? The doctor lightly squeezed her hand. Yes, there are many types of violence, and none of them are acceptable. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. It was Andrew, still breathless from the adrenaline of the confrontation. "May I come in?" Paul gestured affirmatively, and the cardiologist approached cautiously. "How is she?" he asked. "The baby seems to be fine, fortunately," Paul replied. "But we'll keep Louisa under observation for the rest of the day." Andrew nodded and turned to Louisa. "Mrs. Alistair, I'm so sorry for what happened. The police have arrived and are taking statements from witnesses. Your husband is being held by hospital security." Louisa closed her eyes for a moment. Everything seemed unreal. Just a few hours ago, she was only worried about a routine checkup. Now, her marriage, her safety, and that of her daughter, her entire life seemed to be falling apart. "Thank you, Doctor. Thank you for intervening," she finally said, her voice almost a whisper. "Andrew Caldwell," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "And you don't need to thank me. Any decent person would have done the same." But both knew that wasn't true. Many people had witnessed the beginning of the assault, and no one had interfered. Fear, indifference, or simply shock had paralyzed those present. Only Andrew had acted. "What happens now?" Louisa asked, suddenly frightened by the implications of what had just occurred. Paul and Andrew exchanged glances. "That depends on you," Paul replied. "The police will want your statement. You can press charges." "Or not," Andrew added, noticing the fear in her eyes. "But honestly, Mrs. Alistair—" "Louisa. Please, call me Louisa." "Louisa," he corrected himself with a slight smile. "I think you and your daughter deserve more than living in fear." At that moment, something changed within Louisa. Andrew's words, simple and direct, struck a chord that had long been dormant. She looked at the ultrasound screen where the image of her daughter still flickered and made a decision that would forever change the course of her life. "I want to talk to the police," she said, with a firmness that surprised herself. "I want to press charges." Outside the room, in the now silent corridor, Louisa's phone began to ring. On the screen, Richard's lawyer's name flashed insistently, foreshadowing the battle that was just beginning. The 3 days Louisa spent under observation in the hospital turned into a whirlwind of emotions and difficult decisions. News of the assault spread quickly through the corridors, and within hours reached the newsrooms of the main newspapers in Brighton. The Alistair family, however, moved with equal speed to contain the damage. The morning after the incident, Louisa woke up to soft knocks on the bedroom door. She expected to see a nurse, but who entered was Dr. Marianne Carter, a middle-aged woman with a severe expression, wearing an impeccable pantsuit. "Mrs. Alistair, I'm Marianne Carter, your husband's lawyer," she said, closing the door behind her. "I've come to discuss yesterday's regrettable misunderstanding." Louisa adjusted herself in bed, instinctively placing her hands over her belly. "There was no misunderstanding, Doctor. My husband assaulted me in front of dozens of witnesses." Marianne smiled, a calculated smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I understand you're distressed. Pregnancy brings hormonal changes that affect our emotions and perceptions." "My perception is perfectly clear," Louisa retorted, "as are the security cameras that recorded everything." The lawyer sat in the chair beside the bed, maintaining her impeccable posture. "Louisa, may I call you Louisa? Mr. Alistair is deeply sorry for what happened. It was a moment of stress, of worry. He's been working too much, you know." "I'm tired of excuses, Doctor. They're not excuses, they're explanations, and precisely because he recognizes the seriousness of the situation, Richard has authorized me to make you an offer." Marianne opened her briefcase and pulled out a document. A generous offer, I might add. The paper she extended contained the terms of an agreement, a substantial financial compensation, an apartment in Louisa's name, a guarantee that all baby costs would be covered by a special fund, and in return the withdrawal of the complaint and a confidentiality agreement. "I'm trying to save your time and energy, Louisa. You're pregnant, you need peace. A lawsuit will be exhausting, exposing, and frankly, unnecessary." Louisa looked at the document for long seconds, then returned it unsigned. Tell my husband I'm not interested. Marianne's smile faded. Don't be impulsive. Think about your daughter's future. She's exactly who I'm thinking about. The lawyer stood up, adjusting her blazer. You have 24 hours to reconsider. After that, I cannot guarantee the offer will remain the same. After Marianne's departure, Louisa remained motionless, processing what had just happened. Richard was trying to buy her silence. That's how he solved all problems with money, and the worst part was it usually worked. A light knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Nurse Sylvia, a young woman in her 20s who had become her ally during those turbulent days. "Visitor for you," Sylvia announced with a knowing smile. Dr. Andrew asked if he could come in. Louisa's heart gave an unexpected leap. Of course, let him in. Andrew entered, carrying a small vase of orchids. "I hope you like flowers," he said, placing the vase on the bedside table. "How are you and the little one?" "Feeling?" "Physically well," Louisa replied. "Emotionally. It's complicated." Andrew pulled up a chair and sat down. There was something about his presence that conveyed calm, a sense of security that Louisa hadn't felt in a long time. "I just had a visit from my husband's lawyer," she continued. "They offered a settlement if I withdraw the complaint." "And you're considering it?" "No," Louisa replied without hesitation. "But I'm scared, Dr. Andrew. Richard is a powerful man. He has connections all over the city. What if I can't prove anything? What if he turns things against me?" Andrew took a few seconds to respond. "First, just call me Andrew. Second, I understand your fear. It's legitimate. But I need you to know you're not alone in this." "What do you mean?" "I mean the hospital is on your side. The management, the staff who witnessed it, the doctors. We're all willing to testify, and we have the recordings." Louisa felt a wave of relief wash over her body. "The recordings. Richard will certainly try to access them, destroy them." "We're already one step ahead," Andrew smiled. "Teresa, our administrator, made backup copies and sent them to an external server. Even if he manages to erase the originals, the copies are protected." For the first time in days, Louisa felt a glimmer of hope. "Why are you helping me, Andrew? You don't even know me." The doctor looked at her seriously. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because no one should go through what you're going through. And because I see courage in you, Louisa. A courage that deserves support." His words touched her deeply. For years, Louisa had felt diminished, as if her voice and her desires didn't matter. Now this stranger saw something in her that she herself couldn't. "See?" The conversation was interrupted by a firm knock on the door. It was Teresa Grant, the hospital administrator, accompanied by a young woman with curly hair and a determined posture. "Louisa, this is Dr. Caroline Davies from the Women's Advocacy Center. She heard about what happened and came to offer legal assistance." Caroline approached with a gentle smile. "Can we talk for a bit? I promise not to take up too much of your time." Andrew stood up, ready to give them privacy. "I'll come back later to see how you are." After he left, Caroline sat where Andrew had been. "Teresa filled me in on the situation. First, I want you to know that you have options, Louisa. You're not stuck with anything. My husband's lawyer has already been here. She offered a settlement. I imagined she wouldn't waste time." Caroline shook her head. "What do you want, Louisa? Not what you think you should do, not what others expect. What do you truly want?" The question was simple, but no one had asked it before. Louisa closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the sound of her own heart. When she reopened them, there was a clarity she hadn't felt in years. "I want justice. I want him to understand that he can't do this to me or to anyone else. I want to protect my daughter, and I want my life back." Caroline smiled. "Then that's what we'll pursue." In the following hours, the lawyer explained the process, the legal steps, what Louisa could expect. She didn't hide that it would be difficult, that there would be exposure and strain. But she also made it clear that a network of support had formed and was growing around her. Late in the afternoon, Sylvia rushed into the room. "Louisa, you need to see this." She turned on the small television on the wall. On the main local news broadcast, the presenter was talking about the incident at the hospital. Sources confirm that businessman Richard Alastair was detained yesterday after assaulting his pregnant wife on the premises of St. Vincent's Hospital. The case was registered as domestic violence and attempted bodily harm. The businessman paid bail and will respond freely. The news continued, mentioning Richard's history as one of the most respected businessmen in the county and his marriage to Louisa, described as a talented architect, who gave up her career after marriage. Something that wasn't true. Louisa had continued to work, although Richard made it increasingly difficult. "How did they get this information so fast?" Louisa asked, astonished. "The hospital didn't officially release anything," Sylvia replied, "but there were many witnesses. It was impossible to contain." The door opened again, and Teresa entered, her face tense. "Louisa, we have a problem. The security team just informed me that the camera system on the obstetrics floor suffered a technical failure. Yesterday's recordings were corrupted." Caroline immediately stood up. "That's no coincidence." "Definitely not," Teresa agreed. "But as I told Dr. Andrew, we made backups. The copies are safe." "And they need to stay that way," Caroline said. "The Alastairs have influence over many people in this city." Louisa felt a chill. It was just the beginning, and Richard was already using his power to manipulate the situation. Night fell over the hospital, bringing an uneasy silence. Louisa tried to sleep, but her mind was buzzing with worries and future scenarios. That's when she felt it, a gentle movement inside her belly, as if the baby was saying, "I'm here." She placed her hand over the spot, feeling the delicate touch again. "We're going to be okay," she whispered to her daughter. "I promise you." The next morning, Marianne Carter returned, this time accompanied by a tall, thin man with grey hair. He introduced himself as Jonathan Barnes, another lawyer for the Alastair family. "We've come with a new proposal," he said, his grave voice filling the room. "Mr. Alastair is willing to make a public apology in addition to all the compensations previously offered." Louisa noticed that they avoided saying Richard, as if they were talking about any client, not her husband. "My answer remains the same," she said firmly. "Louisa," Marianne intervened, "be reasonable. How long have you known Richard?" 3 years. You know he's not a violent man. It was a lapse, a terrible mistake that he's willing to correct." "A mistake?" Louisa felt indignation rise. "He tried to hurt my daughter deliberately in front of witnesses. That's not a mistake, it's a crime." Jonathan sighed theatrically. "Unfortunately, it seems you're being influenced by people who don't have your family's best interests in mind." "What people?" "This doctor, for example, Dr. Caldwell. We heard he's been visiting you frequently. What's his interest in all of this?" Louisa felt her blood boil. "His interest is in being a decent human being, something you two seem to be unaware of." "Be careful with accusations, Mrs. Alastair," Jonathan warned. "Defamation is a serious crime." "So is domestic violence," she retorted. "And my answer is still no." The lawyers exchanged glances. "Very well," Marianne said, gathering her documents. "We regret that you've chosen this path. I hope you don't regret it when the dust settles and you realize the consequences." As they left, Louisa felt a wave of nausea, not pregnancy-related, but from pure fear, the veiled threats, the mention of Andrew. Richard was starting to play dirty. Hours later, Caroline returned with news. "The judge granted the protective order. Richard cannot approach you or the hospital for at least 30 days. Louisa nodded, but couldn't feel relief. "Will that stop him?" "Legally, yes. In practice, that's why we're arranging a safe place for you when you're discharged." "A safe place?" "Yes. You can't go home, Louisa. It's not safe." Reality hit her with full force. Her life had completely changed in a matter of days. Her marriage was over. Her house was no longer her home. Her future, once so meticulously planned, was now an unknown. "I'm scared," Louisa admitted, finally letting the tears fall. "I'm so scared of what might happen to me, to my baby." Caroline held her hand firmly. "It's normal to be scared. But remember, you've already taken the hardest step. You said no. You chose to fight. That afternoon, Andrew returned. There was something different in his expression, a tension he tried to hide. "Did something happen?" Louisa asked, noticing his restlessness. "I received an interesting call today from Alistair Construction. Apparently they're interested in funding the hospital's new cardiac wing." Andrew smiled humorlessly. "Coincidence, isn't it? He's trying to buy you." "Yes, and when I politely refused, they suggested I reconsider my excessive involvement in your case." Louisa felt a tightening in her chest. "Andrew, I don't want you to have problems because of me." "I'm not having problems because of you, Louisa. I'm having problems because I refuse to be an accomplice to injustice." He approached, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Look, I know we barely know each other, but I want you to know that I'm committed to helping you and your daughter, no matter what happens." His gaze was so sincere, so free of ulterior motives, that Louisa felt something awaken within her. Not just gratitude, but a deeper connection. "Thank you," she said simply, the words carrying a weight that went beyond what she could express. Outside the hospital, Brighton continued its routine. The sun shone over the River Adur, tourists visited Brighton Pier, and life followed its relentless course. But in the corridors of St. Vincent's, a silent battle was just beginning. A battle that would involve power, money, justice, and above all, the courage of a woman who refused to remain silent. Julia Parker's house was a cozy two-story home in the Preston Park neighborhood, far enough from Brighton city centre to offer tranquility, but close enough for Louisa to attend medical appointments and court hearings. As her best friend since architecture school, Julia didn't hesitate to open her doors to Louisa when she heard what happened. "The guest room is ready," Julia announced, carrying the small suitcase that Louisa had managed to retrieve from her old apartment, an operation that required a police escort. "It's not luxurious like you were used to, but—" "It's perfect," Louisa interrupted, looking around with relief. The colourful walls, the simple but cosy furniture, the plants scattered in the corners, everything there breathed freedom. "Honestly, I never got used to that apartment. It was more a showroom than a home." Julia smiled comprehendingly. She had watched her friend's transformation from afar after the marriage, the gradual distancing, the excuses to cancel meetings, the subtle change in behaviour when Richard was around, signs that now seemed so obvious. "Well, here you can be yourself, and that monster won't find you." Louisa nodded, grateful but still worried. She knew Julia's address wouldn't remain a secret for long, not with the resources Richard had at his disposal. But for now it was a safe harbour. The first few days at Julia's house were about adjustment and planning. Caroline visited regularly, updating Louisa on the progress of the case. The protective order was in effect, but Richard's legal team's manoeuvres were becoming increasingly aggressive. "They're trying to disqualify your testimony," Caroline explained one rainy afternoon as they shared tea on the covered veranda. "They say you have a history of emotional instability, aggravated by pregnancy." Louisa shook her head, incredulous. "It's always this, isn't it? The woman is hysterical, the woman is unstable." "Classic," Caroline agreed. "But don't worry. We have Dr. Paul's testimony confirming that you are in perfect mental condition, in addition to the reports from the nurses and hospital staff." "And the recordings?" "Still safe. Teresa has been incredibly cautious." What neither Louisa nor Caroline knew was that, at that very moment, the content of those recordings was being leaked to the internet. An anonymous hospital employee, someone who had witnessed not only the assault, but also Richard's subsequent attempts to manipulate and silence, decided that the public deserved to know the truth. It was Julia who brought the news, bursting through the kitchen door with her cell phone in hand. "Louisa, you need to see this." On the small device, the security camera video was playing. The quality wasn't excellent, but it was clear enough. Richard in his impeccable suit, his face contorted with rage, pushing Louisa against the wall. The audio, captured by the security system, conveyed every cruel word, every threat. And then, the crucial moment, the violent pressure against her prominent belly, the tearing scream, Andrew's intervention. "It's everywhere," Julia explained, swiping to show the various platforms where the video was circulating. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all the major news portals have picked it up. It's viral, Louisa. Louisa sat down, feeling her legs weak. On one hand, there was the horror of exposure, of seeing her most vulnerable moment shared with millions of strangers. On the other, a strange sense of relief. Now everyone would see. There would be no way for Richard to deny it, for his legal team to distort reality. "How did they react?" she finally asked. Caroline, who had been watching in silence, replied, "It's a hurricane. Hashtags like buying justice for Louisa and buying Richard abuser are among the top trending topics. Public figures are speaking out. And most importantly, other women are sharing their own stories." "What stories?" "Of abuse, of controlling relationships, of fear. Your case has become a catalyst, Louisa." Caroline's phone rang, interrupting the conversation. She answered, exchanged a few brief words, and hung up, her face tense. "That was Teresa. The hospital is in an uproar. The administration is trying to find out who leaked the video. And Richard's team has already filed a motion to take the content down, claiming privacy violation." "Will it work?" Julia asked. "Probably not. Once. It's on the internet. It's impossible to completely control. And there's the public interest argument since it's a crime." Louisa remained silent, absorbing this new reality. Part of her wanted to hide, to protect herself from the exposure. But another part, a part that was growing every day, understood the power of those images. "I need to do something," she finally said. "What?" Julia and Caroline asked in unison. "I don't know yet, but I can't just keep reacting. I need to take control of this situation." That same night, Louisa's phone, a new number that only trusted people, possessed, rang. It was Andrew. "Are you okay?" was the first thing he asked. "I'm processing everything," Louisa answered honestly. "And you? How's the hospital?" "Chaos," Andrew admitted. "Teresa is under pressure to find the person responsible for the leak. The press won't stop calling. And Richard, well, he sent not one but 3 lawyers to demand a retraction from the hospital." "Retraction?" "Yes. They want the hospital to issue a statement saying the video is out of context, that you were out of control first, and that his reaction, though inappropriate, was a response to provocation." Louisa felt her stomach churn. "And will the management give in?" "Not if Teresa and I have any say. Most doctors and staff are on your side, Louisa, but—" "But?" Andrew hesitated. "Some are being pressured. Jonathan, that older lawyer of Richard's, has been personally visiting certain team members. There have been sudden promotions, job offers at other institutions." "He's buying witnesses," Louisa concluded, feeling a wave of despair. "Trying, but not everyone has a price." The determination in Andrew's voice comforted her. From the beginning, he had been a constant presence, an unwavering support. In her visits to the hospital for follow-up exams, Andrew always found time to see her, to ask how she was feeling, to ensure everything was going well with the pregnancy. "Andrew, thank you for everything." "You don't need to thank me." "I do. You risked a lot for me, for someone you barely knew. Perhaps at first. But now—" The silence that followed was charged with unspoken possibilities, with feelings they both recognized, but knew it wasn't the time to explore. "Now we're friends," Andrew completed, opting for safety. "Yes," Louisa agreed, feeling both relief and a pang of disappointment. "Friends." The next morning, Louisa woke, up to the sound of engines and voices. Opening the curtain, she saw something she never expected. The street in front of Julia's house was filled with people, mostly women, carrying signs with phrases like, "We are with Louisa," and "Enough impunity." "What's happening?" she asked Julia, who entered the room with a breakfast tray. "An act of support," her friend replied, placing the tray on the table. "It started on social media last night. Women from all over Brighton decided to come show solidarity." Louisa sat on the edge of the bed looking out the window. There were journalists, 2 trying to interview the demonstrators, and further away a police car, apparently ensuring everything remained peaceful. "This is I don't even know what to say. Say you're going out there to thank them, Julia suggested with an encouraging smile. I can't. I'm in my pajamas. My hair's a mess. Then get ready. Have your coffee, get dressed, and go out there. These women need to see that you're well, that you're fighting. Louisa hesitated. The exposure still scared her. But at the same time, she felt a growing responsibility. Her case had become something bigger than herself. After dressing, in a simple dress that accommodated her belly, Louisa took a deep breath and headed for the front door. Julia accompanied her, holding her hand in silent support. As she opened the door, she was greeted with applause and shouts of encouragement. Unknown faces looked at her with a mixture of admiration and solidarity. Children, mothers, grandmothers, women of all ages and backgrounds, united by a common purpose. An elderly lady approached, carrying a small bouquet of daisies. "For the brave young woman," she said, extending the flowers with hands wrinkled by time. Louisa accepted the gift, moved. Thank you all." A young reporter made her way through the crowd. "Mrs. Alistair, can you tell us how you feel about all this mobilization?" Before she could answer, another female voice spoke. "She is Louisa Matthews, not Mrs. Alistair." There were murmurs of agreement. It was a small but significant detail. Not being identified by the surname of the man who had assaulted her was a way to reclaim her identity. "Louisa," the reporter corrected herself, "how do you feel?" Louisa looked around at the expectant faces. She hadn't prepared any speech, any statement, but the words came naturally. "I feel grateful and strengthened. A few days ago I was alone, scared. Now I realize I was never truly alone, that my story is the story of many, and that together, perhaps we can change this reality." Her voice, initially hesitant, gained firmness as she spoke. This was no longer just her personal case against Richard. It was a bigger fight, against a system that for too long had allowed men like him to act with impunity. "I'm not just here for myself or for my daughter. I'm here for all of us. Because silence protects no one. It only perpetuates violence." The applause that followed was deafening. Camera flashes went off, recorders were raised. Louisa Matthews had found her voice. Meanwhile, in the luxurious penthouse apartment in the Hove neighborhood, Richard watched the scene on television, his face contorted in a mask of fury. "That woman will regret this," he muttered, throwing a crystal glass against the wall. "Who does she think she is to humiliate me like this?" Marianne and Jonathan, sitting on the opposite sofa, exchanged worried glances. The situation was rapidly getting out of control. What had started as an unfortunate incident that could be covered up with money and influence was now a national scandal. "Richard," Marianne began cautiously, "we need to change strategy. The video changed everything." "Find out who leaked it," he shouted. "I want that person destroyed." "We're working on it," Jonathan assured. "But at the moment, our focus should be on containing the damage to your public image." "My image? They're painting me as a monster. As an abuser," Marianne completed, risking it. "Richard, you were filmed assaulting your pregnant wife. There's no denying that. What we can do is work on the narrative." "What narrative?" "The one about a man who made a terrible mistake in a moment of extreme stress. A man who is deeply remorseful and willing to seek help." Richard let out a bitter laugh. "Remorseful? That ungrateful woman betrayed my trust, disrespected me, and now she's exposing me nationally. And you want me to apologize?" "I don't want you to apologize," Marianne said firmly. "I want you to offer them. There's a difference. It's strategy, not submission." Richard made to protest again, but was interrupted by Jonathan's cell phone. "It's the shareholders," the lawyer said after checking the message. "They're calling an emergency meeting to discuss your continued tenure as CEO." The news hit Richard like a punch. His company, his empire, his life's work, all at risk because of that woman. "They can't do that. I'm the founder, the largest shareholder." "And also the public face of the company," Jonathan reminded him. "A face that is now associated with domestic violence against a pregnant woman." Richard sank onto the sofa, suddenly pale. The gravity of the situation finally seemed to hit him. It wasn't just a fleeting scandal. It was a real threat to everything he had built. "What do you suggest I do?" he finally asked, his voice devoid of its usual arrogance. "Press conference," Marianne replied promptly. "Tomorrow, you show contrition, emotional distress, you admit you need help controlling impulses, mention stress, perhaps even undiagnosed depression. And Louisa, say as little as possible about her. Say you respect her privacy and her pain. Don't try to justify what you did. Just contextualize." Richard nodded slowly. He didn't like the idea of appearing fragile, but he understood the necessity. It was time to play the public opinion game. Back at Julia's house, Louisa received an unexpected visit from Teresa Grant. The hospital administrator looked tired, with visible dark circles under her thin-rimmed glasses. "Sorry to show up unannounced," Teresa said, accepting the cup of tea Julia offered. "But I thought you should know personally." "Know what?" Louisa asked, sitting down with difficulty due to her advanced pregnancy. "Who leaked the video?" Julia and Louisa exchanged surprised glances. "So, you found out?" Teresa nodded. "It was Raphael, one of the nurses on duty that day. He left a confession letter before resigning." "Resigning? But why? Will he be prosecuted?" "The hospital doesn't intend to prosecute him," Teresa assured. "Technically, he violated confidentiality rules, but no one wants to turn him into a villain. As for the resignation, it seems it was pressure. From Richard, indirectly. Raphael had been receiving veiled threats. Nothing explicit, just disturbing coincidences. His car was vandalized twice in the same week. His son's school received an anonymous call about the child's inappropriate behavior. The landlord suddenly decided to sell the apartment where he lived." Louisa covered her mouth with her hand. "My God, all this because of me?" "No," Teresa corrected emphatically. "All this because of an abusive man who refuses to be held accountable for his actions. Don't blame yourself for Richard's actions, Louisa." At that moment, Julia's phone vibrated. She read the message and looked up, perplexed. "Richard is holding a press conference tomorrow," she announced. "It's on all the portals." Teresa sighed. "It was to be expected. The Empire is threatened, so he'll try to control the narrative." "What do you think he'll say?" Louisa asked, feeling a knot in her stomach. "Probably whatever the PR people tell him to," Teresa replied dryly. "Remorse, apologies, promises to seek help. The standard script for someone caught red-handed." "And do you think people will believe him?" "Some will, yes. There are always those who want to believe that men like Richard can change, that they made a mistake and deserve a second chance." Teresa adjusted her glasses. "But after that video, many others won't believe him. And that's why you need to be prepared." "Prepared for what?" "For the counterattack. Richard won't simply accept defeat. If public opinion doesn't turn in his favor, he'll look for other means of pressure." A heavy silence fell over the room. Louisa unconsciously placed her hands over her belly, a protective gesture that had become automatic. "The preliminary hearing is in 2 weeks," Teresa reminded. "And from what Andrew told me, Richard's legal team is preparing something big." "What do you mean?" "We don't know for sure, but Andrew heard rumors that they hired a psychiatrist to evaluate your mental state." "But I haven't even been examined by a psychiatrist." "Exactly. It seems they'll try to disqualify you as mentally unstable, based only on selective reports and the expertise of this professional." Louisa felt panic growing. It was exactly what she feared from the beginning, being labeled as crazy, hysterical, emotionally unbalanced by pregnancy. "They can't just invent a diagnosis," Julia protested. "They can't, but they can present a professional opinion based on observable behaviors and third-party reports," Teresa explained. "It's unethical and probably won't withstand serious scrutiny, but it can cause short-term damage." Louisa stood up, suddenly determined. "Then I'll get ahead of them. I'll consult a psychiatrist myself, now, before the hearing." "Excellent idea," Teresa approved. "I know an exceptional professional who would certainly agree to evaluate you." "And I'll give an interview," Louisa continued. "Exclusive. My version, my voice, before Richard distorts everything in his press conference." Julia smiled, proud of her friend. "Who would Have thought that shy girl from architecture school would become this warrior woman? Louisa returned the smile, tired but genuine. I'm still that girl. I just learned that sometimes we need to fight, even when all we want is to hide. That night, as the city slept, two worlds prepared to collide. In his luxurious apartment, Richard rehearsed phrases of remorse he didn't feel, guided by a public relations team hired at great expense. In Julia's modest house, Louisa wrote in a notebook every detail of the years of psychological abuse, every control, every manipulation, every veiled threat. The truth of both would soon be exposed for all of the United Kingdom to judge. And in the midst of this media and legal battle, a small life was developing, oblivious to the chaos around it, protected only by the fierce love of a mother who had finally found her courage. The Brighton Crown Court in the centre of Brighton was surrounded by an unprecedented crowd that Monday morning. Journalists from across the country, women's rights activists, curious onlookers and supporters formed a compact mass that stretched along the pavement and spilled into the street, forcing the police to block traffic. Inside a car with tinted windows, Louisa observed the scene with a mixture of apprehension and disbelief. I never imagined it would come to this, she commented, nervously adjusting the skirt of the navy blue outfit Julia had helped her choose, formal enough for a courtroom, comfortable enough to accommodate her 8 months of pregnancy. Your case touched a raw nerve in society, Caroline replied, sitting beside her in the back seat. You've become a symbol, Louisa. I don't feel like a symbol, she confessed. I just feel like a scared pregnant woman going to face the man who tried to hurt my daughter. And that's exactly why so many people are here, said Andrew, who was driving the car. Because you're real. Not a statistic, not an abstract headline. A flesh and blood woman facing something thousands face in silence every day. In the days leading up to the hearing, much had happened. Richard's press conference was a carefully orchestrated spectacle of regret and contrition. With tear-filled eyes and a choked voice, he spoke about the moment of losing control that would never be repeated, about the immense pressure he faced in business, about his commitment to seeking psychological help. He even announced the creation of a foundation to combat domestic violence, an irony that did not go unnoticed by more attentive commentators. In response, Louisa gave a single interview to the Brighton Gazette. Without drama, without tears, just the raw truth. The pattern of control that began subtly and intensified. The gradual isolation from friends and family, the small humiliations that preceded the physical violence. Her interview, in contrast to Richard's spectacle, was marked by a silent dignity that moved readers across the country. They're clearing a path for us, Andrew announced, as 2 police officers moved the crowd aside so the car could approach the side entrance of the courthouse. Remember, Caroline said, holding Louisa's hand, this is just a preliminary hearing. The goal is to determine if there's enough evidence for a full criminal trial. You just need to answer the questions honestly. Louisa nodded, taking a deep breath. What if he tries to intimidate me? If he looks at me that way? I'll be by your side the whole time, Caroline assured, and he won't be able to approach you. The protective order is still in effect. The car stopped and the police opened the door. The noise of the crowd intensified. Shouts of support, camera flashes, questions fired by reporters. Louisa instinctively placed her hand over her belly, as she always did when she felt threatened. I'm with you, Andrew whispered, offering his arm to help her out of the vehicle. That simple gesture, Andrew's silent support, gave Louisa the strength she needed. She raised her head, ignored the shouts and cameras, and walked with firm steps into the building, flanked by Caroline and Andrew. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was more controlled, though no less tense. The courtroom designated for the hearing was packed, with press representatives occupying the back rows. In the first row, Louisa spotted familiar faces, Julia, Teresa, Dr. Paul, and even Mrs. Irene, the hospital receptionist, all there to support her. And then, for the first time in weeks, she saw Richard. He was sitting on the other side of the room, flanked by Marianne, Jonathan, and 2 other lawyers Louisa didn't recognize. He wore a dark, sober suit, very different from the light, flashy suits he used to prefer. He looked thinner, paler, probably part of the strategy to appear dejected, suffering. Their gazes crossed for an instant. Louisa expected to see hatred, perhaps a veiled threat. Instead, she saw something that disturbed her even more. A confident smile, as if he knew something she didn't. "Don't let him destabilize you," Caroline whispered, noticing her tension. "That's exactly what he wants." Judge Helen Vance, a woman in her 50s with a severe expression and penetrating gaze, entered the room. Everyone stood. "You may be seated," she said, settling into her chair. "This is a preliminary hearing in the case of Louisa Matthews against Richard Alistair, under accusation of domestic violence, aggravated by attempted bodily harm against a vulnerable person, namely a fetus in gestation. The objective is to determine if there is sufficient evidence for a full criminal trial." The hearing began with the prosecution's presentation of evidence. The video of the assault, witness testimonies, medical reports confirming the physical and psychological stress caused to Louisa, as well as a behavioral analysis demonstrating the pattern of psychological abuse. Next, it was the defense's turn. As Louisa feared, the strategy was exactly what Teresa had predicted, to disqualify her mental state. The psychiatrist hired by Richard, Dr. Maurice Farrell, presented a report describing Louisa as emotionally unstable, with paranoid tendencies exacerbated by pregnancy. "How can you assert this without ever having personally examined the patient?" the judge questioned, visibly annoyed by the tactic. "I based it on third-party reports and the analysis of observable behaviors," the psychiatrist replied, unfazed. "Mrs. Alistair demonstrates classic patterns of borderline personality disorder, characterized by intense emotional reactions and a distorted perception of reality." Caroline immediately stood up. "Your Honor, this is absolutely unethical and devoid of scientific basis. The defense is trying to pathologize the normal reaction of an abuse victim." "I concur," interjected prosecutor Rachel Sanders. "Furthermore, we have here the report from Dr. Clara Miller, a forensic psychiatrist who personally examined Ms. Matthews and attested to her full mental capacity." The judge examined both documents, her face revealing no emotion. Finally, she set them aside. "The court will disregard the report presented by the defense, as it was produced without direct examination of the party involved, violating basic ethical principles of medicine." A murmur ran through the room. First point for Louisa. The hearing continued with the witnesses' testimonies. Dr. Paul described Louisa's medical history during pregnancy, emphasizing that she was always exceptionally balanced, even in stressful situations. Teresa recounted what happened at the hospital, including Richard's subsequent attempts to manipulate evidence and witnesses. Then it was Andrew's turn. His testimony was clear, precise, without emotional flourishes. He described exactly what he saw. Richard assaulting Louisa, deliberately pressing on her belly, uttering threats. "Dr. Caldwell," Jonathan interjected during the cross-examination, "is it true that you developed a personal relationship with Ms. Matthews after the incident?" The question, clearly designed to insinuate a romantic involvement that would compromise the testimony, made Caroline stand up again to protest. But Andrew answered before she could speak. "If by personal relationship you mean friendship and support for a patient in a vulnerable situation, then yes, we developed such a relationship. As a doctor, I have a duty not only to care for the physical aspects of health, but also to ensure the safety and overall well-being of patients. If you are insinuating anything beyond that, the answer is no." The direct and professional response left Jonathan visibly uncomfortable. Another failed attempt at disqualification. Finally, it was time for Louisa's testimony. She walked to the witness chair, aware of the gazes fixed on her, especially Richard's. "Ms. Matthews," the judge began in a neutral voice, "please describe the event of August 15th at St. Vincent's Hospital." Louisa took a deep breath and began to speak. Her voice, initially hesitant, gained strength as she recounted the events of that fateful day. Not just the assault itself, but the context. Richard's controlling calls, the unfounded accusations, the pattern of abuse that had been intensifying for months. "He was always intense," she explained, carefully choosing her words. "At first, I mistook it for passion, for protection. Only later did I realize it was control. And what about the incident at the hospital? The judge asked. We were in the waiting room. He started accusing me of dressing up for other men, something completely absurd. I was wearing a simple maternity dress. When I tried to explain this, he became furious. He grabbed my wrist tightly, then pushed me against the wall. Louisa paused, the memories still painful. And then he pressed his forearm against my belly, hard, while saying that maybe this way I'd learn to respect him. A heavy silence fell over the room. Even some journalists, accustomed to maintaining emotional distance, seemed visibly disturbed. And what happened next? The judge continued. Dr. Andrew Caldwell intervened. He immobilized Richard and called security. Did you fear for the baby at that moment? I did. In that instant, I thought that my daughter might. Louisa fought back tears. But fortunately, she's fine. The exams show there was no harm. And do you fear for your own well-being? Yes, Your Honor, I know Richard. I know what he's capable of when crossed, and I know he has the resources and contacts to make my life a living hell if he wants to. Objection, Marianne interjected. The witness is making assumptions about my client's future intentions. Overruled, the judge replied dryly. The witness is stating her fear based on her knowledge of the defendant. Then it was Jonathan's turn to cross-examine Louisa. With a smile that was meant to be friendly, but seemed predatory, he approached. Ms. Matthews, you claim to fear for your safety. However, in the weeks following the incident, you gave interviews, participated in demonstrations, exposed yourself publicly. Does this not contradict this supposed fear? Louisa was not intimidated. No, Counselor. There are different kinds of fear. I fear for my physical safety, yes, but I've discovered that I fear even more living in silence, allowing abusive behaviors to continue without consequences. Are you taking advantage of your new celebrity status? Jonathan insinuated. Objection, Caroline protested. Offensive and irrelevant question. Sustained, the judge agreed. Counselor Barnes, confine yourself to the facts of the case. The lawyer changed tactics. Miss Matthews, is it true that you argued with Mr. Alastair before the incident? That you intentionally provoked him, knowing his temperament? No, Counselor. I merely responded to his unfounded accusations about my appearance. And you did not raise your voice? Did you not make gestures that could be interpreted as aggressive? I raised my voice, only to ask him to release me when he gripped my wrist tightly, and the only gesture I made was to try to pull away. Jonathan seemed frustrated with Louisa's clear and firm answers. He tried a few more leading questions, all answered with the same dignified calm. Finally, after 4 hours of testimonies and arguments, Judge Helen Vance announced she was ready to issue her preliminary decision. Based on the evidence presented, including the video that clearly captures the act of violence, the consistent testimonies of multiple witnesses, and the medical reports confirming the physical and psychological stress caused to the victim, this court determines that there is sufficient evidence for a full criminal trial. A collective gasp ran through the room. Louisa felt tears burn her eyes, but maintained her composure. Furthermore, the judge continued, considering the gravity of the offense and the potential risk to the physical integrity of Ms. Matthews and her baby, the court maintains the protective order in effect and adds the mandatory use of an electronic ankle monitor for the defendant, ensuring he maintains a minimum distance of 500 meters from the victim. On the other side of the room, Richard stood up, abruptly. This is absurd. I am a respected businessman, not a common criminal. Mr. Alastair, the judge's voice cut through the air like a blade. One more outburst like that, and you will be held in contempt of court. Your social status does not grant you immunity from the law. Richard sat down again, his face contorted in barely suppressed fury. His lawyers surrounded him, whispering advice and warnings. The hearing is adjourned, the judge declared, striking her gavel. The full trial will be scheduled for 2 weeks from now. As the room emptied, Louisa remained seated, processing the result. It was not a definitive victory, but it was an important step. Caroline gently squeezed her shoulder. You were incredible, Louisa. We were, she corrected, looking at everyone who had supported her. I couldn't have done it alone. At the courthouse exit, the crowd was still present. This time, however, Louisa did not shy away. With Caroline on one side and Andrew on the other, she briefly stopped to address the reporters. Today was just the first step on a journey for justice, not just for me and my daughter, but for all women who live in fear. Meisung. This case served to show that no one, no matter how rich or powerful, is above the law. 3 weeks later, at the height of a particularly muggy Brighton summer, Louisa went into labor. It was in the middle of the night, while organizing some documents for the next hearing. First a mild pain which gradually intensified. Julia, awakened by her friend's groans, wasted no time. Within 15 minutes they were on their way to St. Vincent's Hospital, the same place where everything had begun. "I've already notified Dr. Paul," Julia informed while driving. "He'll meet us at the maternity ward. Do you want me to notify anyone else? Andrew, perhaps?" Louisa, concentrating on breathing through the contractions, simply nodded. When they arrived at the hospital, they were greeted by a prepared team. Dr. Paul awaited them at the entrance, along with the nursing staff. 10 centimeters dilated, he announced after the initial examination. "This little girl is in a hurry to meet the world." The following hours were a mixture of intense pain, fierce determination, and finally the sweetest cry Louisa had ever heard in her life. "She's a healthy, strong girl," Dr. Paul declared, placing the small bundle on Louisa's chest. "Congratulations, Mum." Looking at that red, wrinkled little face, Louisa felt a wave of love, so overwhelming it almost knocked her down. There she was, the reason for all her struggle, the strength that had kept her firm in the most difficult moments. "Hello, Hope," she whispered, kissing the little head covered with dark fuzz. The name was not chosen by chance. It was what that child represented not only to Louisa, but to all the women who had found inspiration in her story. Andrew arrived moments later, still wearing sleepwear under his hastily donned lab coat. His eyes lit up upon seeing mother and daughter. "She's perfect," he said simply, approaching with reverence. "Want to hold her?" Louisa offered. Carefully, Andrew took the small bundle in his arms. The ease with which the baby settled, as if recognizing a safe presence in him, did not go unnoticed by anyone. "Would you be her godfather?" Louisa asked, surprising herself with the spontaneity of the proposal. Andrew's smile lit up the entire room. "It would be an honor." Richard Alistair's final trial occurred when Hope was exactly 2 months old. It was a much more complex and draining process than the preliminary hearing, extending over 3 days of intense debates, testimonies, and presentation of evidence. Richard's defense tried every possible tactic, discrediting witnesses, questioning the integrity of the video, suggesting that Louisa had provoked the violent reaction. But the evidence was irrefutable, the witnesses consistent, and Richard's history of controlling behavior well documented. On the 3rd day, when the judge finally announced the verdict, guilty of all charges, a collective sigh swept through the room. The sentence, 5 years in prison under a semi-open regime, substantial compensation to Louisa and the child, and the requirement of psychological treatment. Richard, who had maintained a facade of remorse throughout the trial, finally dropped the mask. In a fit of rage, he shouted obscenities and threats, needing to be restrained by security guards. His final loss of control only confirmed everything Louisa had said about him. Upon leaving the courthouse, Louisa did not feel the euphoria she expected. Instead, a serene calm enveloped her. It wasn't about defeating Richard. It was about reclaiming her own life, her dignity, her future, and that of her daughter. 1 year after the sentence, Brighton witnessed the inauguration of the Hope Support Centre, a special wing of St. Vincent's Hospital dedicated to victims of domestic violence. The project, conceived by Teresa and funded by a coalition of companies committed to the cause, offered not only medical care, but also psychological, legal, and social support. Louisa, now the hospital's director of architecture, had personally designed the space. Welcoming, safe, respectful of each patient's privacy and dignity. The soft-toned walls, the common areas designed for children, the consulting rooms that ensured discretion. Everything reflected her experience and sensitivity. At the inauguration ceremony, she was nervous. Hope, now a plump 14-month-old baby, babbled happily in Andrew's arms, who had become a constant presence in both their lives. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked, adjusting a rebellious curl in the girl's hair. "Absolutely," Louisa replied. "It's important to give a face to the statistic, to show that there is life and hope after abuse." When she stepped onto the small stage set up at the entrance of the center, she felt the gazes of hundreds of people. Many of them were women who had found inspiration in her story. Others were healthcare professionals, social workers, lawyers, all committed to the cause. And there was also the press, which continued to follow her journey. "When I entered this hospital just over a year ago, I was only worried about a routine pregnancy checkup," she began. "I never imagined that day would change not only my life, but that of so many other people." The words flowed naturally as she shared her journey, not focusing on the trauma, but on overcoming it, on the support network that formed, on the lessons learned. Silence is the abuser's greatest ally. It is in silence that he prospers. It is in silence that he finds his strength. When we decide to speak out, when we refuse to be silent victims, we begin to break the cycle. As she spoke, her eyes met Andrew's, who watched her with a mixture of pride and something more, something that had been growing between them over the months of shared experiences, mutual support and discoveries. This center is not just a place of refuge for vulnerable women. It is a symbol that society is changing, that we no longer accept violence as a natural part of relationships. It is a symbol that there is life after trauma, that there is light after darkness. Upon finishing her speech, Louisa received Hope from Andrew's arms. Together, mother and daughter cut the symbolic ribbon that inaugurated the center. Later, after the greetings, interviews, and formalities, Louisa finally found a moment of quiet in the center's internal garden, a circular space with a small reflective pool designed to be a place of reflection and healing. Andrew found her there, watching the stars reflect in the water. "That was a beautiful speech," he commented, sitting beside her on the stone bench. "Thank you. It still surprises me how I went from someone who could barely defend herself to someone who speaks in public without trembling." "It doesn't surprise me at all," Andrew said, covering her hand with his. "I always saw that strength in you from the very first day." Louisa smiled, intertwining her fingers with his. There was no rush between them, no expectations, only a mutual understanding, deep respect, and the seed of something that could, with time and care, blossom into love. Hope, who was playing with the colorful pebbles at the edge of the reflective pool, let out a clear laugh as she saw a golden fish emerge on the surface. The sound of her joy echoed through the garden, a living reminder that the future, despite all the scars of the past, was full of possibilities. "You know what's most incredible?" Louisa reflected, watching her daughter. "That something so terrible could generate so much good. How many women will be safer because of this center? How many will find the courage I found?" "That's how it works," Andrew replied softly. "Sometimes, from the deepest darkness, the brightest light is born." That night, as the stars shone over Brighton, Louisa Matthews realized that her story, far from ending, was just beginning. A story no longer defined by the abuse she had suffered, but by the strength she had discovered, by the good she had generated, and by the love for her daughter, for herself, and perhaps, one day, for this kind man by her side. And as Hope laughed, playing with the reflections in the water, Louisa knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice by breaking the silence.